Hi everyone, I'm Sweet Melba. Thanks for joining me on the porch. Well, it's my final week of work this week. After almost 29 years, just a couple months shy, I am wrapping up my career. And what I've really been thinking about, I think, as this week has started, and I've kind of been thinking about what this last week would be like. And it's really down to two things. It's making sure I finish this chapter right and that I start the new one right. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. So thanks for joining me. So I've been over the last 90 days and a little more than that, I've been talking about, the decision to retire and wrap up my career. And a lot goes into that, and I know I'm making the right choice. I'm not second guessing that. But, you can't help, and I think you have to. I think you got to look back of the things and the opportunities that you had, the people you worked with, what you learned along the way. And that's what I've been doing. And I've shared some of that over the last, few months now. And it's been great. I don't have any regrets about the career that I chose and working in the nonprofit field and then deciding to start my own business. Just me and the different organizations I've got to work with and the different um, campaigns I've got to work on, and the latter part of my career, the historical research I've got to do. I have learned so much and met so many different people and been able to help them complete their family history stories, and being introduced to historical objects and stories that I won't forget. And I continue to share, and I look forward to doing that in a different capacity going forward, not in a career capacity. So, it's about looking back on that, right? I think you've got to, um, and hopefully, if you're kind of approaching that retirement piece, hopefully you don't have any regrets either. Were there decisions you could have made differently? Sure. But overall, I think you look at the big picture, and I don't. It's been a wonderful career. I'm glad that I chose it, and I'm glad to be wrapping it up. I think I've done what I really wanted to do, and I'm at that point where I'm content in the sense that, again, I've kind of done what I wanted to do in my career, and I'm glad I got the chance to do that. So that you can't push that aside, I don't think. There's stuff to look forward to, but you got to look back too. And I've made a few phone calls and let people know. Probably send out an email. I might wait a little bit on that, but it just you're wrapping it up, right? You're wrapping up that work in that sense. So that appreciation for what you've had the opportunity to do, I think, is important. But finishing also has some other components to it as well, wrapping up and finishing a career. So finishing my last week, my intended date was going to be June 30th that I would be done. But there were a couple straggling things that just didn't get done. And for me, it's important that I get those done. Are they big things? No, not necessarily. Could somebody else do them? Yeah, they probably could. But you know what? I started that and I'm going to finish that. So I'm going to work out the rest of this week. So my adjusted date will be July 3rd. So that will allow me the time that I need to get those last, little things done, get some files cleaned up, things like that. Kind of leaving the environment in which I worked, ready for the next person who's going to be doing that work. So I wasn't too disappointed about not getting the June 30th date. I was more concerned about getting the work done that I wanted to get done, that I thought was important. So extending it a few more days is not a big deal. But driving to work. I think there's going to be a day there along the way, whether it'll be Friday or before, that you kind of go, I won't be driving this drive as much as I used to. And obviously, the people that I work with, I won't get to see them as often. I'll still see them because I'm still going to be involved in other ways. But you just won't see them as often. And some of them have made transitions too over the last few years. So when they learned that I was going to be retiring, they're like, all right, yep, been there. And they're still involved as well. So, it's not an end in that sense. It's just a different aspect of being involved with this area. And I'm looking forward to how that's going to evolve. But again, I really wanted to finish off the projects. And for me, that's part of, finishing well, right? That, you're leaving on the terms that you want to be leaving on. And owning my own business, I have that, flexibility to do that. That date isn't necessarily carved in stone. So again, I'm going to wrap up some of these little dangling things, clean up a few things. So I think that is really an important aspect for me, and why I was willing to kind of adjust the date a little bit, so that I can continue to complete that. So I'm going to do that. But I'm going to, enjoy the view a little bit more this week on my ride to work, to my client's office. And it, the other day it occurred to me too. I thought, gosh, how many times have I driven this road? And it's a gorgeous view. Maybe I'll get some clips of it and be able to share it in next week's video, after all is, said and done. But yeah, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a fun week, actually. I know some of the things I've already wrapped up on. It was nice to close that box or close that file and go, you know what, that one's done. So it's a rewarding aspect, to be able to have that flexibility so that you can finish off those things, tie the bow on it, and leave it for the next person. So that's an important part of what's going to be happening for me this week. So if you are already retired, do you remember your last week of work? How did that go for you? Hopefully well. I mean, were there certain things that you wanted to make sure you got done before you left? And what activities were important to you during that last week? And if you were an employee somewhere, they probably had a party for you, something like that. And I've mentioned, owning my own business. That just is just not that type of thing. So I think my husband and I are going to go out on Friday night and just kind of, toast to the end of this chapter. So if you'd like to share, though, I'd love to hear what your experience was and what you remember most about your last week of work. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, for me, this week again is all about wrapping it up, closing that chapter, making sure that the chapter ends well. And I think that lays a groundwork for the next chapter to start well. And that was really my key thing I think I really thought about for this last week of work was you're ending something and starting something at the same time. And you want both of those to go well. I do anyway. And you got to do what you need to do that. But it's not a walking away. It's not a see ya, or that, the famous song, take this job and shove it. That is nowhere near the way I feel. I just feel I've done what I wanted to do. And like I say, a few little projects I want to, make sure they're done, some boxes closed up and whatnot, um, for this week. But I think, I think it's going to be a good week in the sense that I think things are going to feel like they're completed and they're completed well. And I've mentioned in some of my previous videos that I will kind of transition and continue to kind of do the work that I do, but I'll be doing it in a different capacity. But the work part of it, I want to close that up right. But at the same time, I think when that chapter ends well, it makes the new part start well. And I'll talk more about that next week and kind of how that's going to look, because I've mentioned before that I'm kind of taking a month to just kind of let my mind shift. So I'll share a little bit more next week about how that new chapter is going to start, I hope. So, again, just I think a comforting aspect of this week. I don't feel sad about it. I don't feel happy about it, so to speak, right? I just feel like it's the right thing at the right time. And that's huge, I think. When you know, you know. I say that a lot, but when you do, you do. And I think that's where I'm at. I hope you've enjoyed some of the videos that I've made in the past 90 days, roughly, about this process and kind of what different things have come to mind and what I've noticed along the way. And even before the 90 days, this is something when you decide to retire that, the financial is one aspect, which is critical, right? But there's so much more that goes into it. So if you haven't seen some of the other videos, I invite you to go back and look at some of those. Again, I just really wanted to share, and I think in a lot of respects, just document for me what those different thoughts were, what the experiences have been in coming to the decision to retire and the different things you think about. So I hope you've enjoyed the videos again along the way, and I hope you've subscribed to the channel. If you're new, I invite you to subscribe if you enjoy that, because what comes next is a whole nother chapter. So I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for joining me on the porch. I'm Sweet Melba, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.